I don't remember his name. The newspapers barely mentioned it, as if it didn't matter. All they gave us was his age, 43, in the city, Yokohama. But in the end, he was just another number in the growing list of victims. Still, I wanted to believe he mattered to someone. I wanted to believe someone out there remembers him. It was a humid June evening in 1985, and the streets of Yokohama were alive with the sounds of traffic and distant laughter from izakayas spilling onto the sidewalks. The man had just left his late shift at a small logistics company. He was just a regular person, an office worker with a creased suit, a weathered briefcase, and a life that probably looked like everyone else's. But that's the thing about stories like this. You never expect the ordinary to spiral into horror. He lived alone in a modest apartment near the train station. Nights like these, with the air thick and sticky, he often stopped by vending machines on his way home. Cold drinks in his hand, he'd climb the narrow stairs to his apartment, sit by the open window, and let the breeze carry him into a sense of peace. That night was no different. Or so he thought. The vending machine was tucked at the edge of a quiet street, its fluorescent glow flickering faintly. He dropped his coins into the slot and waited for the familiar clang of a falling bottle. That's when he saw it. A bottle of one of his favorite drinks, already sitting on top of the machine. Free drink, he must have thought. Maybe someone forgot it. Or maybe it was a quiet act of kindness. A stranger leaving behind an unexpected treat. It was such a small, innocuous decision. A decision he'd probably made a dozen times in his life. He reached for the bottle, cracked the cap open with a faint hiss, and took a long sip. It wasn't until he was halfway home that he started feeling strange. His neighbor, Mrs. Takata, would later describe the sounds coming from his apartment that night. She said it started with coughing, wet, violent, and unrelenting. Then came the groans. She thought he might have had food poisoning, or even a bad cold. He was quiet by the time she decided to knock on his door. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They found him collapsed in his bathroom, foam on his lips and blood staining the sink. His skin was pale. His skin was pale and clammy. By the time they got him to the hospital, his lungs were already failing. "Did he drink anything unusual?" the doctor asked Mrs. Takata. She mentioned the half-empty bottle on his kitchen counter. They sent it for testing. The results came back 2 days later. Paraquat. To say it was devastating wouldn't do it justice. The doctors had seen this before. By June of 1985, it was already the 8th case that month. But knowing what it was didn't mean they could save him. The poison had worked its way into his cells, ripping them apart from the inside. His lungs were destroyed. He spent 3 days in agony, his breath shallow, each one dragging him closer to the inevitable. When he died, the nurses said it was almost a relief, like a storm that had finally passed. What haunts me most about this story is its utter randomness. This man wasn't targeted. He wasn't an enemy of anyone. He was just unlucky. A brief lapse in judgment, a single sip, and that was it. I think about that vending machine sometimes. I wonder if it's still there, glowing faintly on that quiet Yokohama street. I wonder if anyone hesitates before using it, haunted by a vague sense of unease. Or maybe time has buried the memory, and it's just another machine among millions, sitting quietly, waiting for the next unsuspecting hand to reach out. The story you just heard was based on true events that shook an entire nation. This is the story of the Paraquat murders, a chilling mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Picture this: a bustling street in 1980s Japan, vending machines glowing faintly in the night. These were symbols of convenience, modernity, and trust. But in 1985, someone decided to weaponize that trust, turning an everyday act into a potentially deadly gamble. By the end, lives were lost, and the fabric of normalcy was forever torn. So, grab your drink, but make sure it's safe, and let's dive into this disturbing case. The year was 1985. Japan was in the middle of its economic boom, a time of unprecedented growth and technological advancement. The streets were lined with vending machines, offering everything from hot coffee to cold sodas, soups, and even beer. These machines became part of daily life, a convenient and reliable staple. In fact, Japan's vending machine culture is something unique to the country. By the mid-80s, there were over 5 million vending machines across the nation, about one for every 23 people. You could find them on busy streets, quiet back alleys, and even in rural villages. These machines operated with a sense of trust. The products were safe, the technology was reliable, and the interaction was simple. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When something so ordinary and safe becomes a tool for murder? This was the fear that gripped Japan during the summer of 1985, when the paraquat murders began. Let's talk about the weapon of choice, paraquat. If you're unfamiliar with it, paraquat is one of the deadliest herbicides in the world. It's primarily used to kill weeds and grass, and it's so toxic that even a small amount ingested by humans can cause severe damage. Once consumed, paraquat attacks the cells in your body, particularly your lungs, leading to respiratory failure. There's no antidote, and death is often slow and agonizing. To make matters worse, paraquat is odorless and tasteless when diluted, making it virtually undetectable in drinks. This made it the perfect weapon for the perpetrator, who mixed it into beverages and left them as bait for unsuspecting victims. This nightmare began on April 30th, 1985, in Fukuyama, a city in western Japan. A man picked up a drink near a vending machine, thinking it was free. Within hours, he was rushed to the hospital, suffering from severe poisoning. The drink he had consumed was laced with paraquat. He did not survive. At first, authorities thought this might have been an isolated incident, perhaps a tragic case of accidental contamination. But as the weeks went on, more cases emerged, each following the same pattern. A drink left near or on a vending machine, a curious victim who picked it up, and a sudden, unexplained illness that often turned fatal. By the end of 1985, the death toll had risen to at least 12, with 35 others seriously injured. The victims were from all walks of life: men, women, young and old. There seemed to be no specific target, no clear motive. This randomness is what made the case so terrifying. Anyone could be a victim. It wasn't just the deaths that caused panic, it was the loss of trust. Imagine living in a world where something as simple as grabbing a drink could be a life or death decision. The Japanese public, known for their love of vending machines, began to avoid them altogether. It was as if a shadow had been cast over one of the most mundane aspects of daily life. Japanese authorities launched a massive investigation. They analyzed the beverages, tracked the distribution chains, and interviewed anyone who might have seen suspicious behavior around vending machines. The tampered drinks were primarily popular brands, like Oranamin C and Real Gold, energy drinks that were widely available in Japan at the time. One of the most baffling aspects of the case was the method. The bottles themselves showed no signs of tampering. It's believed that the killer used a syringe to inject the poison through the caps, leaving no obvious indication that the drinks had been altered. This level of precision and planning suggested that the perpetrator might have had some scientific or even medical knowledge. But despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find any leads. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no security camera footage. It was as if the killer had disappeared into thin air. And with no pattern to the victims, the case became a game of cat and mouse, with the authorities always one step behind. So who could have done this? The Paraquat murders have left investigators and the public with more questions than answers. Who could have committed such a heinous crime? Was it the work of a lone individual, or was there a group behind the poisonings? Some theories suggest that the perpetrator might have been a disgruntled employee from the beverage industry, seeking revenge against their employer. Others believe it could have been a random sociopath, someone who wanted to watch the world burn, so to speak. There's even speculation that it could have been a form of protest, though no political or ideological motives were ever confirmed. The Paraquat murders changed the way Japan viewed safety. Suddenly, vending machines were no longer symbols of convenience, but of potential danger. Beverage companies added warning labels to their products, and vending machine operators posted signs urging people not to consume drinks found nearby. But the damage was already done. The trust had been broken. People began to carry their own drinks or purchase beverages only from trusted stores. And while the poisonings eventually stopped, the fear lingered for years. The Paraquat murders weren't the first case of product tampering, nor would they be the last. In fact, they bear a striking resemblance to another infamous case, the 1982 Tylenol murders in the United States. In that case, someone laced Tylenol capsules with cyanide, killing 7 people and sparking widespread panic. Both cases share some eerie similarities: random victims, a toxic substance, and a method that exploited public trust in everyday products. But while the Tylenol case led to sweeping changes in packaging safety, such as tamper-proof seals, the Paraquat murders remain a chilling reminder of what can happen when those safeguards are absent. It's been nearly 40 years since the Paraquat murders, yet the case remains unsolved. The randomness of these attacks make it one of the most unsettling crimes in modern history. There was no rhyme or reason. no motive that investigators could discern. And perhaps that's what makes the story so haunting. The idea that someone out there could commit such a senseless act of violence, targeting strangers for no apparent reason. It's enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. The perpetrator could still be alive, living quietly, their secret locked away forever. In today's world, cases like the Paraquat murders feel almost unthinkable. Advances in technology, such as surveillance cameras and forensic science, have made it harder for criminals to act without leaving a trace. Yet, the fear remains. Could something like this happen again? The truth is, while technology has made us safer in many ways, it's also created new vulnerabilities. The Paraquat murders are a stark reminder that trust can be a fragile thing, and that even the simplest actions, such as grabbing a drink, can have unexpected consequences. The Paraquat murders remain one of Japan's most chilling mysteries, a case that's never been solved, and may never be. It's a story that forces us to confront the darker side of human nature, the capacity for cruelty, the randomness of violence, and the fragility of our trust in everyday life. As we end this episode, I want you to think about this. How many times have you picked up a drink without a second thought? How many times have you trusted something simply because it seemed safe? The Paraquat murders remind us that sometimes the most ordinary things can hide the greatest dangers. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And for just $5 a month, you can support the show and get bonus episodes every month, as well as full access to our back catalog of bonus stories. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones.